Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of about 50 books, most of them novels, and also some nonfiction books.
I'm Molly Jo Riley, producer of the podcast, curator of the Unemployment Cookbook, and the newly finished first draft, NOLA.
Round of applause. Can't even say it.
Yeah,
for finishing your
first. That long to write it too. So,
congratulations for finishing your first novel.
Thank you.
And it's back to me because it is my pleasure to introduce someone I count as a friend. I don't know if he counts me as a friend, but it doesn't matter. I count him as one. And we go way back before his first book came out, and which was over 10 years ago, I think. Yeah, about 10 years ago. Stephen James is with us. He writes mostly thrillers. Many of them, though, are crime-based. That is, that some of them are police procedurals and they have elements of mystery to them, and that's why he's going to help us understand that particular genre a little more today. He is an award-winning novelist, and we go back to being at the same writers' conference many years ago, and he became a faculty, one of the most popular faculty members when I was directing. People love him. Only guy I know of that has a Master of Fine Arts. Now Aaron has one, but not in storytelling. And I assume other people have MFAs in storytelling. Is that right, Stephen?
Yeah, I got mine back in '97, and I think there were about 60 people in the world at the time. And I just heard the word that the master's program in storytelling is closing down at the college that I attend. So, yeah, so I guess it is a terminal degree.
That's an academic joke. I like that. It's a terminal degree. Well, Stephen has done really some great work. He's been a best-selling author, won numerous awards. He's praised in Romantic Times, in Publishers Weekly, Suspense Magazine. Really, he just does great work from beginning to end. And he also has written some works on how to write the novel. Story Trumps Structure is a must-read for everyone. And that's available. Not only does he do that, he does his own writers' conference. Remind me again of the name of that. It's
we do a novel writing intensive.
Okay.
Yeah, once or twice a year. So we'll do those in the spring, upcoming in spring.
Yeah, so that might be something that you want to avail yourself of. So he does those, as well as you've taught writing in writing conferences on 4 different continents.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to teach in South Africa, Kazakhstan, India, and Switzerland, and
that's great.
Yeah,
they don't let me out of the country, so 4 continents. That's amazing. I've interviewed one person who has been on every continent but one, and he says he's still trying to get to Antarctica, but he's taught on every one of them. But I just can't imagine 4 continents. And also, Stephen is one of the sharpest wits, one of the funniest guys, one of the most talented people on stage. So it's not just writing; it's just any form of communication. And I never miss an opportunity to sit out in the audience, and I laugh till my sides hurt. So he's here to help us understand police procedurals, mysteries, and of course he specializes in the thriller aspect, which is those items on steroids. And thanks for being with us today, Stephen.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the kind words as well. It's good to be here.
And we are super excited to have you along. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump into our topic tonight. So a quick reminder to those of you listening to the audio only, you can see us live on YouTube or at aarongansky.com/firstsinfiction or Firsts in Fiction Live. And that's every other Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Would love to have you along in the chat room. We've got several people in the chat room with us tonight, listening in and asking questions and participating in our discussion. So that's always fun. If you're finding us on YouTube, we do ask that you'd hit that thumbs up button, give us a quick like, and also subscribe and share the good news with your friends that we've got some great information about how to write quality fiction for free. And it's available to everyone. So we would appreciate that. Let's jump into our Ask the Author segment for tonight. And this question is, I thought, I don't want to say it was funny, but it was interesting to me because it didn't even occur to me as a question that people would have, but it makes a lot of sense. And the question is it wrong to want money for your works? Yeah, that was my first reaction too. But then it occurred to me that there are some people out there who believe that perhaps you should be writing just for the altruistic value of it, which is great. I mean, write for that reason, but also make some money if you can. So it says, the question asks, while I enjoy the work, I've been told I shouldn't write with money in mind and that books should be given away. Okay. My quick response is, if you're writing with money in mind, thinking that you're going to write a novel and sign with, Random House and get a, $25,000 signing bonus, or not signing bonus, advance, or whatever the case may be.
You could call that a signing bonus.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen, especially right out of the gate. Maybe if you've been writing for a number of years and have, collected awards and best-selling titles and things of that nature. But the reality is most people are not going to get that.
Thanks for bursting my bubble.
I know. So if that's what you're writing for, you might be in it for the wrong reasons. If you are writing only to make money, I think that's problematic as well. There's nothing wrong with writing as a career. There's nothing wrong with supporting yourself through your writing. I don't want to make it sound that way. I applaud those who are able to do it. But at some point, the writing should be something that it should still be a passion. It should be something that you love. And so when the intersection of doing what you love and making money doing what you love, that's a really, really sweet spot to be in. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting money for your work at all. I don't believe that books should be given away unless you're doing it as some sort of marketing campaign and you're giving away some free, trying to kind of create some buzz and some word of mouth, and you're going to give some away free for marketing purposes, for reviews and things of that nature. So that will happen, but you don't just go hand out your books on the corner because most people won't take it. And if they do, most people will probably end up throwing it away. If they're not paying for something, they're probably not going to appreciate it in the same way. Pops, when I was driving your car when I was a teenager and you would ask me to wash the car, I would become, outraged. Like, how dare you ask me to wash this car that I've been driving? The minute I got my own car, I was washing it twice a day, and it's something different when you're paying for your own thing. You're going to appreciate it more. We would never expect an artist to give away their paintings. We would never expect a sculptor to just donate their sculptures. It's a job. Yes, it's a job in the arts. But that doesn't make it any less valuable. The world is a far scarier, far more boring place without art. You would never catch a screenwriter giving away their screenplay for free. It just doesn't happen. And so it's not wrong, in my opinion, my humble opinion, to want some money for your work and to write and hope for a contract and work toward that end. I think that's completely fine. Do the work because you love it, but if you can make some money at it, you should probably be doing that too. And I don't believe that you should be giving your books away for free. So, Pops, what's your take?
Well, I appreciate the fact that you gave a humble opinion. Mine's not so humble. Yeah, I've heard things like that. I've heard variations of that. And I would say this: if it's wrong to want your work, to do your work and expect some money for the work that you did, then I'm probably the literary world's biggest sinner. Now, there are things that I've written that I've given away, or if I think it has some, especially social meaning or some ministry meaning, then that might be something that I would do. But generally, I write not just to get paid. I write because I love to write, but the amount of work and effort that goes into this and the time invested. Just ask Molly how much time she invested in getting her first novel done.
No, don't ask me that. Ask me how much it's shorter it's going to take to get the second one done.
You realize the amount of investment that you have. And what other people don't realize when they're asking this kind of question is the publishers get paid. They have to get paid because they can't buy ink and paper out of their own pockets. They can't pay the artist to do the cover. They can't pay the editors. So everybody's getting paid in the process. The writer should get paid too. They're the one providing the product. So all this. So now I'm not talking about being greedy. I'm just talking about being, if you're going to publish professionally, then it's all right to expect to be paid. You're probably not going to get rich. You might, some do. I know people make, 7-figure income writing. I know those that make minimum wage writing. It's just what it is. But that being said, there is no shame and there's no reason to feel guilty about writing for money. There have always been patrons of the arts, whether it's for painters or sculptors or theaters or things like that. There are people who would give money to the artist so that they can do what their talent allows them to do without being bound by other things. So, and that's why in the book world, they usually give an advance in traditional publishing. Some of the smaller publishers don't do this, but they usually give an advance because it takes a long time from even the time you sign the contract to the time the book is out. And, you got to eat. There's no sense in signing a author who's going to starve to death in the next couple of months. So paying for such things is not unusual, and it's certainly not wrong for a writer to get paid. Except maybe Stephen, you do all yours gratis, don't you, Stephen?
No, I wish sometimes that I could, but usually when I have an opportunity to either do a book or speaking engagement, I have 3 criteria that I look at. One is it a good fit for me? Am I the right person to do it? Second is it fun? What's the fun factor? And then the third is finances. So for me to say yes to something, it has to be 2 out of 3. So for an instance, it might be that it's really fun and energizing and I'm a good fit, but it might not be that much money. Well, maybe I'll do that. But on the other hand, it might be a lot of money. But if it's not a good fit and it won't be fun, then I won't do it. It's got to at least be 2 out of 3. So that's sort of how I navigate through the decisions when it comes to going to speaking engagements and also to writing projects. Of course, it's fine to be paid, and we need to be paid. Yeah.
Well said, Stephen. I remember taking a class from you at Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference when I think the first one I attended, and one of it, I think it was how to support yourself as a writer, and you gave a lot of really good tips of how you can make money writing. Doing things like articles, blog posts, those types of things to kind of support yourself while you're writing your novels and the like. And really great practical tips. And that was the first time I thought, wow, I can really make a career out of this if I wanted to. I've not yet done that because I like the steady paycheck from the teaching. And like you say, I do enjoy teaching, so it's fun and it does provide finances. So I've stuck with that personally, but I do remember that class. And so appreciate you kind of weighing in with that answer there. So, well, we're talking police procedurals and mystery novels tonight. We've been looking at different genres over the course of the last few weeks. And tonight we got a great guest with us to talk about that. So again, our quick disclaimer about genre, it is very much a fluid term. Stephen, as Pop said at the beginning, you kind of do best known for like thriller type of work, but your thrillers are very much also mystery and police procedural kind of based novels. So it kind of cross genres, but there are still a lot of things that we can learn from some of the that people like to use. And so I'm not the expert in this field. Pops, you've done a lot more than I have, and Stephen, you've definitely done a lot more than I have. So we thought we'd just do a little bit of a Q&A. So Pops, you've got a question here to begin with?
Sure. Yeah, my first question for you, Stephen, is this. Your fiction, as we've said, falls in the thriller category. And for those who are new to writing, thriller is sort of an amped-up, fast-paced kind of story with very high stakes, as opposed to, say, something like a cozy mystery where the crime's already been committed, and now it's a matter of just figuring it out. And the suspense and the you might have a mystery, but there's going to be another murder. But a thriller is really sort of ratcheted up. Some of Stephen's books fall into that category. But Stephen, you've had some good success with the Patrick Bowers series. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Patrick Bowers series, and so we can see how all that fits in.
Yes, thanks. As you mentioned, I've done 10 books in this series over the last 10 years, and Al, you were kind enough to look at my first 50 pages 10 years ago and give me some input and insights on how to create suspense, and it kind of helped to get my first book off the ground. So let me just pass on my thanks for that once again. And yeah, as I was working on this idea for a series, I wanted an investigator that did something a little unique and different. There were a lot of books out there on profilers and a lot of things on DNA evidence and so on. So I wanted someone who didn't do forensics and wasn't a profiler. And I came across this unique angle of geospatial investigation. And so I think one of the aspects of writing a successful police procedural or thriller crime drama, a unique angle. So in this case, his angle is he studies timing, location, and progression of serial crimes. I know there are different authors out there who might write a series about a handwriting analyst or someone who body language and is able to tell if someone's lying or not. Whatever it might be, you want a unique angle and perspective, because there are so many crime books, police procedurals, that you want a fresh perspective. I was at one conference and this guy came up to me and said, I don't really read anything that you write because I don't read in your gender. So I didn't really know I wrote in any specific gender, but since then it's been my goal to write trans-genre books.
Oh, no.
What? It just means you can read them in any bathroom you want.
Yeah, you've done others. The Patrick Bowers is what you're best known for, but you've done a lot of other things. You've done some YA as well. So what kind of other books have you written, and how do they differ from the Patrick Bauer books, and what other kind of police procedural ones have you done that are not in the Patrick Bauer series?
Yeah, the young adult books I did is kind of slightly paranormal thrillers, and so I did 3 of those: Blur, Fury, and Curse. And then I've done a couple of science conspiracy novels, Singularity and Placebo, and a fantasy novel. And so over the years, mainly the crime novels that I've done have all been featuring this FBI criminologist named Patrick Bowers. And it's been a fascinating journey. You know, I realized that 10 years of my life have been writing about this character, and it takes me almost a year to write a book. So really, it's a decade of my life, and just thinking about how many hours that is of investigating and thinking about crimes and talking to detectives or FBI agents or DEA agents doing research. When I was thinking about this interview, I thought, man, that's crazy how many hours have gone into just this one series.
That's a lot of books in a series. Most authors don't get to do 10. I don't think I've done any series that's gone that long. I think 5 is my upper one.
Yeah.
Or we did 5, and then they decided the world didn't need a 6th with that one. So congratulations to you for that. One of the things we've talked about as we've been going through some of these genres is trying to teach people that readers have expectations, and some of the best writers always keep their readers in mind. And so if you're writing a romance, there's certain things that they want in romance novels. The boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. Of course, they're more complicated than that, but that's the basic kind of structure that goes with that. Is there any particular kind of formula, particular elements that readers of those kinds of police procedurals, like the Bowers books, that they're expecting to see for them to feel satisfied of the read?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there really are. When you write a crime novel, police procedural, or suspense, typically there's a bigger-than-life crime at the beginning, and then your investigator will either investigate the crime, or in some cases have a surrogate there to investigate the crime on their behalf, but almost always they will be present. They'll look for clues. You might just think of it in that way, and notice something that no one else notices. There will typically be a chase scene in the middle of the book where the main villain, and the hero maybe meet up in some way. There will be red herrings, dead ends as they investigate one thing and find out. They'll have suspects that'll come to the surface, and there'll almost always be a big twist too toward the end where things happen and you think, how on earth is that? And then the twist comes and you say, I should have seen that coming, many pages earlier. And then typically stories that deal with crime almost always deal with the theme of justice in some case, in some way. And so very often justice will be meted out at the end, or it will be postponed maybe to another book. But almost always one of the themes of a police procedural will have to do with justice. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question on that, Stephen. Do you find, you were saying that originally you write for a specific audience, and since you're writing the same characters over 10 years, do you find that writing shifts because it's your same audience, but now they're older or they're more knowledgeable? You have to write it differently in order to still surprise them.
Well, the surprises do become more difficult because you can't really use the same type of twist that you might have used in an earlier book. So with each book, it's been trying to think through, what have I done before? What's different? Thought about an aging audience. I'm the only one that has to age in this case. I'll just
Sorry.
yeah. But I don't really think of it in terms of that. I think in terms more of, what do people coming to this genre, what do they hope for? What do they expect? And what can I give them? And so we're always walking this line, and Al, you know this because you've done thrillers as well, but we're walking the line of giving them the conventions that they come for, but not slipping into cliched situations. So it's always keeping in mind, the more that you understand what people of this genre are looking for, the more you can meet those conventions and expectations without slipping into just writing cliches. So I often do ask myself, what would the reader want? Or what was the reader hoping for, expecting at this point in the story? And my kind of mantra that I like to tell myself is, always give the reader what they want or something better. So that's really my my goal, is to give people what they want when they come to this type of story, or give them something even better that they hadn't anticipated.
That's one of the things that we really spend a lot of time trying to talk about and break down is the formula. And I hate to use the term formula because it makes it sound so derivative, but the truly enduring classics, the really, the best-selling novels, the award-winning novels, are the ones who, like you say, they tinker with it a little bit and they don't fall into the cliche. So you've given us a really good kind of skeleton outline of the points that we should be hitting, the things that we should be doing in these police procedurals and mysteries. My next question would be, what are some of the cliches that authors fall into? What traps should we be trying to avoid?
It's interesting. I was teaching at the Thriller Fest up in New York City a couple of years ago, and I said to the people, I said, give me a cliche from a thriller. And somebody shouted, cut the red wire. And I was like, that's great. So then I said, let's pretend that that's the first line of our book, cut the red wire. And I said, we want to come up with a scene that's unexpected, that has a twist, that escalates things, that might not be what you see. And so I was like, let's just pretend that you had the scene, cut the red wire, and you have a guy there and he's got the radio on and he's like, which wire do I cut? And he can't tell because the lighting is bad, and he's trying to tell if it's the yellow wire or the green wire, and the guy says, cut the red wire, and he's fumbling for it, and then his light goes off and he pulls at his cell phone and time is ticking down, 30 seconds, 29, 28, and finally he pulls out the pliers and it's down to 5 seconds and 4 and 3, and he puts it on the red wire, and then he switches over to the green wire and yells, Allah Akbar, and snips it and blows the building.
Oh my goodness.
And you're like, what? The guy was actually a terrorist and he was there to make sure the bomb went off. Wow. So one of my goals really in writing any of my books is to take the cliche that might be out there and to turn it on its head, to use what people think, oh, I know what's going to happen. He's going to get down to 3 seconds to cut the red wire and then everyone will be safe. Well, that's what people expect, maybe because they've seen it so many times, because it's cliche. So as I look at my books, I say, what has been done to death? And some of those tend to be profiling, and some of those tend to be forensics. It tends to be like the detective falling in love with, one of the suspects is a cliche. The hard-boiled cop who just happens to be an alcoholic and just happens to be in a marital problem, getting a divorce with his wife. I mean, it's been done 1,000 times. And so want to avoid all that and then think of fresh stories and new ways to tell them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, getting that twist, and it helps your book stand out, makes it memorable. It's different than having some wounded detective who has to do this for his own sake or to redeem something he's done wrong in the past. Some good stuff there. Well, let's talk about characters a little bit. So you have this memorable character. How do you go about making your character memorable? Who isn't, if we're doing, like, say, a standard mystery, isn't Nero Wolfe or isn't Perry Mason or isn't Kinsey Malone in the Sue Grafton novels. In this kind of police procedural stuff that you're writing in these thrillers, how do you make your character unique enough to stand out from all of those, or all that have gone that are like him? I mean,
yeah, no, it's good. I look for ways to allow readers to really connect with my main character on the questions that we all have. And so I sometimes tell people one of the fastest ways to make your readers care about your character is to give him or her a wound that we all share. And so in my books, that wound might be grief. So in the early books, for instance, Al, the one that you looked at, The Pawn, the very first novel, it's 8 months after his wife has died of breast cancer. And so he's still reeling with depression from the loss of his wife. He has his stepdaughter, he's caring for her. So he's trying to figure out how to be a dad and how to move on. So that's something people can identify with, is this idea of grief and family. How can I be a good dad? And also, how can I move past grief? And so by giving him these questions that we all might struggle with, or the wounds that we have, people identify with them faster. And I think that writing characters, Donald Moss points this out in one of his books, that when you write a heroic character, your goal is to make him identifiable. So if you're writing Batman or Superman or something, you have to find a place to allow us to identify with him. And if you're writing an everyman type character, you need to find a way to make him extraordinary. So in my books, Patrick Bowers is extraordinary in that he notices what no one else will notice. So he has this almost Sherlock Holmesian ability to notice and identify things, but he's not an egghead, he's a man of action. And so he ends up being a character that is interesting professionally, but he has this depth of emotion with his stepdaughter, and that makes him identifiable. I think the other thing that's really interesting is I think of status, and this is something I sometimes teach on at writing seminars, but we all have different degrees of dominance and submission in the relationships that we have. One person has higher status, maybe professionally or relationally, and so on. Well, I always think of making a character that's strong enough to build a series around has to have multiple layers of status. So Bowers, when he's at a crime scene, he will never give up, never give in, never walk away. He'll always have the high status. But when he's with his stepdaughter, he doesn't always know what to say. Like, she'll pull the rug out from under him, and he ends up with almost lower status. She's a vegetarian. He's always trying to get her to eat, hamburgers. And so one day he said to her, "Look, if God didn't want us to eat cows, he wouldn't have made them out of meat." And she goes, "He made you out of meat." So she's like, "He made you out of meat." So then he doesn't know what to say. So she pulls the rug out, and then so in a sense, by her choice, she ends up flipping the status. That's what's interesting. If he had high status in everything, and he would be one-dimensional. So I look at status, I look at the wounds, and I look at the identification that we have with the characters.
Oh, good stuff.
I borrow that when I talk with my students, and that's one of the things that I talk about is character status, which I learned from you. And one of the exercises that I give them is to have them write about a character in high status, and then have them write about the same character in low status. And like you say, it makes them dynamic. It makes them more believable. It makes them more down to earth. And like you say with Patrick Bowers, the fact that you give him, I don't know if you would call her a foil, but his daughter,
right,
who's able to kind of go toe to toe with him and challenge him on some stuff, and just simply because of the relationship, she's able to kind of flip that status, and that makes Patrick more interesting. And so characters, and this isn't really on our script of questions, but we've talked about protagonists, but protagonists are often defined by the relationship with other characters. Do you spend a lot of time really developing secondary and tertiary characters? About how many do you put in a book? How much do you kind of feature these secondary characters in the aims of better portraying your protagonist?
That's a good question. You know, typically I'll have a team of people surrounding Patrick Bowers, maybe his boss, co-workers, and so on, so that he's not just out there working solo. So there are some characters that appear throughout the series. As far as the number of characters I have in a book, it usually is about 50 characters or so for the book, 50 named characters, sometimes more. So the books are very complex. There's lots going on. There's multiple subplots. Usually they're about 500-page books, and so I like a big feel of a big story. I'm working on a book right now which has a small feel, like a very condensed, and only has a few characters, and that's interesting too. But I've always sort of liked this idea of writing a blockbuster story that would be good in film, and it's multiple dimensions and so on like that. Not multiple dimensions like like through space and time, but I mean multiple dimensions of characterization. And as far as the other characters go, I just continue to ask myself these questions of how would this character naturally respond, and what would this character most likely do, and then I stick them in interesting situations, and I try to see how they'll respond.
And do you try to trip them up?
Yes, and sometimes they end up defining the direction of the story. I write organically. I don't outline. I don't plot anything out, so I've never known how a book that I've started will end. And so I often will stick them in really odd situations or difficult situations, and have no idea in some cases for weeks or even months how they're going to get out of them. But by working on the story and asking the right questions, the story unfolds, and you're able to build it and write it.
Yeah, I've been there myself several times. We've talked about character, we've talked about plot. I'm a real advocate of setting, which I think is often overlooked by especially new writers who tend to think that setting can be interchangeable. What are the settings of your Patrick Bauer novels, and did you pick it deliberately to kind of add to the thriller aspect, or I'm sure they shift settings as well, but what would be the primary setting?
Yeah, they do shift settings, and you bring up a really good point. A lot of people do underestimate the power of setting. I really believe that if you can pick up a book and drop it into another city, you probably haven't written the book right yet. So one of my books takes place in San Diego, and there's no other city in the country that it could possibly work in. It has to be San Diego because of the defense, because of immigrants coming across, and because of the defense, Coronado Island, with the SEALs training. Anyway, one of my books is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there's no other city in the country that it could possibly work in except in Charlotte. New York City, DC, Milwaukee, Denver. Each book is rooted in sort of either the history or the specificity of that location to make it to make the setting. It's vital to the story. And I think one thing people forget too is that setting is always a setting in both time and space. And so sometimes people will think, well, where is the setting? That isn't always the right question. And when is the setting is also applicable. So I always try to get people to think your setting is both time and place, make it as specific as possible so that people can identify with it. And I think as far as describing settings, if you're describing a setting we're all familiar with, a hospital room, a hotel room, something like that, you don't need to go in super detail. Everyone can picture, you just say he was, laying in the hospital bed with tubes sticking out of his arm. You don't need 4 paragraphs to describe the hospital room. Unless it's something unusual, you could say, unlike most hospital rooms, every wall was painted entirely black. Okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, now we wonder why is it in a black painted hospital, whatever. So yeah, if we already are familiar with it, I wouldn't spend a lot of time describing it. Just look for 1 or 2 specific little details that can bring it to mind. And unique settings, though, and typically when we're writing science fiction, history, and well, fantasy as well, typically then we'll spend more time on location. Because even though I might know what a hospital looks like, I might not know what a hospital in the year 2150 looks like. So it'll take more time in those genres, and people expect it when you're writing in that gender.
In that gender. Well, I want to unpack that a little bit more, because you've taught me something here. I've never thought of creating a storyline that has to take place in a particular city and won't fit any place else. I was with you when you were doing some of your research in San Diego, but I had never thought about that if, could you pick this up and move it to Los Angeles? Could you pick this up and move it to Phoenix? That never occurred to me. But so you're saying when you write that the setting, which we often describe as a character,
right,
the setting is so important that if you shift all the action someplace else, it's just not going to work?
Yeah, usually the plot is so entwined with that location that you can't really move it. So, for example, with my latest book, Every Deadly Kiss, it takes place in Detroit. And there's no other city in the country where it would make sense to take place, because Detroit has over 90,000 abandoned homes. Mm-hmm. And there just isn't anywhere else in our country where you'll find 90,000 abandoned homes. And killers from, this is true actually, killers from neighboring states are going into Detroit to leave bodies behind in some of these old homes because they know they'll never get discovered. So when I heard that on the news, I thought, that's so fascinating. I want to do a story in Detroit, and it has to do with these homes that are abandoned and the bodies that are found and so on. When I was doing research in Charlotte, North Carolina for my book Checkmate, Al, you and I did this when we went around on one of those bus tours of the city. Mm-hmm. I did that in Charlotte, and he mentioned that gold had been discovered in Charlotte in 1799, and that for 50 years North Carolina was the gold capital of the United States before it was discovered in California. Then all the gold miners from North Carolina moved out to California. I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting. But then he mentioned that when they built Charlotte, they built it so quickly because of the gold boom that they never filled in the gold mines in uptown Charlotte when they built the city over them. Uh-oh. So that even today, still under uptown Charlotte, there are still 63 gold shafts that have never been filled in. And so when I found that out, I was like, that is too good. I've got to use that in the book. And so in my book, a terrorist is going to blow up one of these gold shafts that's underneath a train, railroad tracks, as a train is going past. And so I did research and found out the exact location of one of these gold shafts, and it actually does go underneath a railroad line today that's still there today. So all of that, I couldn't just pick up the story and stick it in Phoenix or something like that. It's so rooted in the city. That's the way I like to do it, where and even people that live there in Charlotte, I never even knew that there were gold mines underneath the uptown, Charlotte. So that's fun for me to try and find stories that are so unique about a location that people who live there weren't even familiar with them.
Yeah, I really love all that, and Seattle has a really fascinating history as well. I don't know if you've looked into the history of Seattle, but it does bring up a good point. You've been doing a ton of research on these cities, and you mentioned research earlier, and I wonder how much time you put into researching these novels, because just in talking about setting, you talk about the time and the place. Well, you've got to study not only the time and the place, but also the laws that are in place in each unique state and the city that they're within, and then the federal laws and all of that. So about how much time do you spend researching all of that? And do you find that you research more for these police procedurals than you do for some of the other genres that some of the other genders that you write in?
Right. Now, I do actually do a lot of research, and it's hard for me to know how many hours or anything like that, but it takes me about a year to write a novel. And so with that includes the research and the writing and editing and so on like that. So, but I always go to the locations and research things. And then I usually have someone from law enforcement be one of my beta readers before I send the book to my editor, to make sure that all of the terminology is accurate, and the fight scenes and all of that stuff is accurate for the police or the FBI, whatever it is for that book. I think maybe the best compliment I ever got on any of my novels, this guy wrote to me and he said, "I've been a detective for 17 years. And when I read your books, I feel like I'm at a crime scene again." And so for me, that was huge, because he was an expert, and yet he felt that the scene was as realistic as a normal or an everyday crime scene that he might go to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that can make a huge difference, and that's a great compliment for a writer, is when somebody like that detective contacts you, and you've made it so real for an expert that they enjoy it. With a Ship Possessed, you can see the cover behind me. A Ship Possessed. I had somebody, which is about a World War II submarine that comes back in the 50 years late in the wrong ocean without its crew. Somebody called me, tracked me down, and is an old Navy guy. And I had done so much research on World War II submarines. He asked me what boat, they was called submarines, boats, not ships. What boat did you serve on?
Nice.
I wasn't old enough to have been in an old World War II sub like that. But I'll remember that forever. That's one of the highest compliments I ever got. Then when I worked with Jeff Struker for a while, we did 5 books together. And I think after the first book, the highest compliment he paid me, he says, "You think like a soldier." Well, I'd never been in the Army, so I drew a lot of stuff from him and what I was able to glean. But that's half the fun of writing, I think, is learning this stuff and then crafting it into part of the story and doing your best to be as accurate as possible. I don't know if anyone ever does it 100% correct, but at least you aim for that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, being as accurate as you can and authentic as you can for that character, what would that character naturally do? And let them do it. And so I guess if you're writing, no matter who you're writing, whatever character it is, if you can really step into their mind and allow them to act authentically, I think that's the goal for shaping good fiction.
Absolutely. So you wrote the Patrick Bowers series, and he's an FBI agent. How did you go about preparing yourself for that? You mentioned a lot of research, but in what ways did you research?
I read tons of books on criminology. I also toured the FBI Academy and several FBI field offices a number of times. And but part of it was I just started writing. And for me, I don't really research before a project, but I do some, but then during it, as I have questions and so on. And I think really one of the keys is just asking ourselves, what would this character naturally do? And so if he's an FBI agent, if let's say you're writing about a detective and he comes to a crime scene, you ask yourself, well, what would he naturally do? Well, he would put on gloves so he doesn't leave behind, fingerprints. He might look for the entrance and exit routes, look at the blood spatter if there's a weapon present, and he'll notice something no one else notices. And all of these things are believable. And we would say, if we're reading it, okay, well, that makes sense. But if you were to walk in the crime scene and spit out a glob of gum on the ground, readers would be like, nah, I don't buy it. He would never do that. He would never contaminate the scene like that. And so I was teaching actually teaching in France, and we had this workshop, and I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Ask these questions. What would a character naturally do? How can I make things worse? And how can I include a twist? And so I said, let's create a situation. So anyway, this one lady said, how about, I can't do a French accent, so I won't even try, but she said, how about we choose a teenage girl? I said, okay, we have a teenage girl as our character, and so something bad happens. Someone said, her boyfriend breaks up with her. Okay, so her boyfriend breaks up with her. I said, well, now what would she naturally do? And someone said she would eat ice cream. Another person said she would change her status on social media. She would cry. She would call her friend. All of these things, maybe they would be believable for that character. So I said, let's choose one. She said, she calls her friend. Okay, so we have this teenage girl who breaks up. She calls her friend. And I said, now how can we make things worse? Well, this woman from France said, well, she calls her friend, and she says, I'm coming over there right now to talk to you. And she hangs up with her friend. And I said, well, okay, so that's believable. She would go talk to her friend. How can we include a twist? She goes, well, she gets there, and she finds out that her friend is the one that her boyfriend left her for. I said, okay, well, that's could be a twist, but it might be something we would expect. So she goes, and then she grabs a knife and she stabs her friend to kill her. I was like, okay, and suddenly it's a horror story, And then she said, and then she takes the phone and texts the boy, come over right away. I have something to show you. And I was like, from her girlfriend's phone. And so then I said to these people, and everyone was getting into it by then. They're all coming up with storylines and what else could she do? And if there's a twist, how could you foreshadow that she would stab her friend? And I said, look at that look in your eyes. Everyone looked around. I said, that look does not come if I said, let's sit down and write down an outline of a story. I said, what you have right now, you see this story unfolding just by asking the right questions. What would this character naturally do? How can I make things worse? Where can we add a twist? And once you start asking those questions, the story starts to unfold before you. And I'll never forget the look in everyone's eyes. Compare that to the look in someone's eyes when you say, well, let's all sit down and write an outline. I mean, it's just not the same experience.
I agree. You're preaching to the choir here. I'm a discovery writer myself, organic writer, as you say. So I do that because I like to be, I like to experience the novel as I'm writing it. It's kind of like reading a book with it, and you don't know where it goes. And so I always think if I'm not going to be surprised with where my book is going, then my reader definitely isn't going to be surprised. So it's fun to kind of, like you say, ask those questions. How can I make it worse? What kind of twist can I have here? But those questions, I like that you say those come after the primary question of what would this character naturally do? And I think a lot of times, I don't want to pick on outliners here, but I think a lot of times outliners will have characters do unbelievable things just to get from point A to point B. And when you live in the moment, as you say, you're, I think, more likely to allow yourself to ask those types of questions. What is this character naturally going to do? What's their natural outcome? And how can I make it worse? And how can I twist it? So I like that. I like that. Pops, we are kind of coming up on time here. Did you have any last minute questions here for Stephen before we go to questions from the chat room?
No, I'm just really enjoying this. So I think, do we have questions from the chat room, Molly?
We have mostly a lot of people just in awe. One question from Caleb. Caleb says, I'm curious to know what method Stephen uses to get to know his characters, perhaps a spreadsheet.
No, I don't do that at all. In fact, I try to encourage people not to really do those detailed outlines of the character, where he went to school, and what his first cat was named, and who he went on his first date with. Because for the most part, that information isn't essential to get to know someone. And if you do all that spreadsheet information, you're going to be tempted to use it. So I like to tell people that a character with a character with an attitude is always more interesting than a character with a history. So if you can find a way to give your character an attitude about something, whether it's the setting, an object, or just a quirky bit of characterization, people will be intrigued a lot more than if they find out that he went to a certain college 4 years ago and studied this degree or that degree or whatever. And so getting to know my characters takes time. And typically what I'll do is, as I'm writing a book, I'm always asking myself these questions about what the character would do. And very often I'll come to a place and say, you know what? Whatever I wrote about 100 pages ago, that's really not what he would say. So I have to go back and change that. And that's one of the wonders of, using a word processor, is you can do that. So I'll change that so it would be more authentic to what he would actually do. And so I think today we have the capability to be able to do that more than ever before. And I think, why not? As long as we can improve our stories by doing that, making them true to the character as much as possible.
Like you, I've done mostly the intuitive form of writing. Even when I have outlined, when we were doing the Harbinger series, and which meant we were doing novellas, and I had to keep things short, and I'm not very good at keeping things short. The only outline I would use is I would make up chapter titles, and there would be something in the title. And if anybody came up to me and said, okay, so what's going to happen here? Yeah, I don't know. I can tell you what the chapter title is, though, if that helps you out any. But I really have no idea because it hasn't happened. And I had an editor ask me one time in a proposal, says, well, you don't tell us how the story ends. Well, how should I know? I'm just the writer. I haven't been told yet. I haven't experienced it yet. So there is a certain art to that. You have to have a lot of courage to do what you're talking about, knowing that you may have to go back and swap things out.
Sure.
And that's half the fun of discovery. Is it suddenly gets better, or working with a character, and you end up asking yourself, why are you this way? What made you this way? And I had a character like that, an antagonist, and I kept asking, why are you so bonkers? What happened to you? And finally it came to me, but I had to keep, poking and prodding. So
one technique that I've sometimes used in my seminars is I'll tell people, okay, you're going to write a letter from your main character to yourself. And I don't know where I came across this, or if someone had done this many, many years ago in a seminar I was in. So I don't know where the idea came from, but the writer, you're going to write from the character to yourself. And this is how it starts. You never really understood me. What I really want is, and from then you have to write a paragraph from the character to you. But that's the start of it. You never really understood me. What I really want is. And when I do it in seminars, when I do this activity, every single time people will look at it and say, I had no idea that's what this character really wanted. Not everybody, but there will always be some people that this one simple little activity uncovers and unveils that whole characterization for them.
all right, so I have to ask, when you're writing, are your characters real to you?
Yes, they are. They sometimes get me to go in different directions than I ever thought the plot would go, and sometimes I argue with them, but they're always right. And when I don't let them have their way, I have to go back and rewrite and edit what I've written. I know it sounds strange and a little ooky, but that's just the way it is for me.
That's not strange at all. I hope it's not strange at all. I do the exact same thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of intuitive writers or organic or discovery writers, they're all the same thing, just different terms for them, feel that way, that they're following in their character's shadow and they're learning in the process, just as the reader's going to learn. So I've never tried to outline a character. I'll get an idea. I'll know a little bit about them. I might have 3-4 points.
Yeah.
And that's it. I don't know the rest of it. It will come to me. They'll tell me about it. But then they become very real, maybe because I have to spend so much time looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
I've done variations on the "you don't really understand me" kind of a thing, and what I like about it is that it gives the author the license to understand that they don't understand everything about their characters. I think the reason, that our characters feel real to us is because we haven't discovered them fully. And they're complex and they're complicated, and sometimes they don't tell us everything, and sometimes they hide things from us, and sometimes they lie. And if we can, as writers, embrace that and embrace our uncertainty with our characters, it's a lot more likely that they're going to surprise us. And again, if they're surprising us, then they're surprising our readers. They're a lot more interesting. But I do feel your pain about having to go back and change some of the things that the character would or would not say. I famously wrote a novel and got to maybe it wasn't famously, but it's famously in my mind, and got to the end. And in the last 10 pages, I finally figured out who one of the primary characters was and how she would speak. And I found her voice in the last 10 pages of the novel.
Wow.
And had to go back and rewrite every single line of dialogue from beginning to end.
Wow.
It was not an enjoyable process, but it really changed the trajectory of the book, and made her character much more engaging and much more sympathetic, and she became a pretty solid character.
So which book and which character?
Not published and won't say. So
okay.
hopefully, I'm hoping for a contract soon on that one, though.
Since we're talking about that, and I think the viewers and listeners appreciate this kind of stuff, but I did that, and this is one of the challenges of being a discovery writer. And that is, I was writing a book called Enoch. And I bring Enoch back, and I don't know, I'm 25% of the way through this book, and it's not gelling. I cannot get this thing to work, and I don't know why. I was writing a scene where I had a minor character, kind of a thug, and he did something, and then I thought, well, I've got to clean that up. He ended up in jail with Enoch, and then so what else would happen there? We got to clear up that one part. And as I was clearing that up, I realized that Enoch was not the protagonist. He was not the star of the show. It was this other guy who, in my mind, when I started, was maybe going to make 2 scenes, and that's it. Then I was going to send him packing. And once I realized I had identified the wrong protagonist, the book came together, but not until that point. And then the other one I like to tell is, again, on a ship possessed, I had 2 characters. The main protagonist, who when I was writing it was J.D. Reed. We changed his name to Stanton later because the publisher had a book coming out with the same name on it. But anyway, his sidekick, his supporting protagonist, was a young ensign, and it just wasn't working. There was no chemistry. And finally, I realized what the problem was. The ensign wasn't a man; he was a woman. So I did a quick sex change operation on him, and the book began to work. But it's because I started down the wrong path. My characters had something else in mind.
I always hate it when my characters are the wrong genre. Transgenre characters, So
this is going to be a thing.
Yeah. I do like the one thing I do want to revisit before we start wrapping up for tonight is you said, repeat it for me. You said a character with an attitude is always more interesting than a character with a history. Is that how you said it?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people spend too much time writing up the history of the character.
Yeah.
And very often you can just make them engaging by just a quick quirk, quick attitude, and suddenly we want to know more about that character. We don't typically read that someone went to a certain college and feel like, I need to know more about that character. But when they say something odd, strange, unique, we kind of like, I want to know more. Like in one of my books, somebody said something like, let's see, like, be careful out there. And he said, Mr. Careful is my middle name or something. The guy said, what? That doesn't even make any sense. Or this one character said, are you scared? And the guy said, smell of fear for breakfast. And yeah, because I don't even know what that means. But it's just like, you want to know more. The guy says, I eat the smell of fear for breakfast. You're like, I want to know more about that guy. He sounds interesting. Very often that's all you need to get people, intrigued and to start drawing them in. We actually had bumper stickers made up with that saying on it that we gave away at one of my book release parties. So you have people driving all over the country right now with this bumper sticker that says, I eat the smell of fear for breakfast.
Nice.
Excellent.
We have one more question before we wrap up. Dave popped in at the end. He says, Stephen, doesn't a mystery have to be outlined somewhat so you don't screw up solution to the mystery, the red herrings, etc.?
Perhaps it would be helpful to do that. I don't know. I don't want to disparage outliners too much, but I think of one book that I wrote where I thought I couldn't quite get the ending figured out. And I had an August deadline, and I got an extension till September, till October, till November 10th. Oh. And my editor said, we really need this November 10th. I said, oh, no problem. I'll get it to you. Well, it was November 7th that I couldn't figure out how to finish the book. And so I was flying out somewhere, and I was like, I know what I have to do. I have to change who the killer is. Now, I'd been working on the book for a year, and I finally said, no, I don't want to change the killer. But I realized that I needed to do that. So I got to the airport in Cincinnati, and I called my editor. I said, guess what? This book's going to be even better than we thought. She said, oh, I'm glad to hear that. That's great. I said, I'm going to change who the killer is. And there's this long pause on the other side of the line. Finally, she says, all right, I trust you as long as it'll be a better book. And so it did take me a while to make that change, but that's the book, The Night, and no one has written to me yet and figured out who the killer was to that book, but I think they would have the other way. One of my books was due 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, I still didn't know how it ended.
Oh my God.
And I wrote that for a year. So by 10 o'clock, though, I figured out the ending, and I wrote the ending and sent it in, but yeah, it was 3 hours before the book was due, and I didn't know how it ended yet. So I think that, it isn't essential for me, but there are always twists, and especially when I get back down to the last couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks before it's due, at that point, I usually solve the mystery. But until then, I usually don't know the answer to the ultimate mystery.
I've done several mysteries, and I don't think I knew the ending to one of them when I was working on it. My fear was if I knew the ending, I would tip my hand in the writing. Yeah. I'd give away too much. So I didn't want to know. And if you're doing just traditional mystery now, you usually have 5 or 6 suspects anyway.
Right.
So that's what I did. I think I had 6 suspects. I knew one of them did it, but I didn't know who till I got to the last third of the book, and then realized finally there was only one person who met all the criteria.
In one of my interviews, I spoke with someone who told me that when the author of The Sixth Sense wrote the story, I always forget how to say his name. M. Night
Shyamalan.
So I don't know if this is completely true or not, but this was an interview, I guess, that M. Night did. He said that he didn't think of the twist for The Sixth Sense until it was done. And when it was done, he thought, what it would be interesting is if that guy was a ghost. Oh, I wonder what I would have to change to make that happen. He went back and changed a couple scenes, and that was basically it. But he had just written it as a straight thriller beforehand. Well, everyone knows that story for the twist. I mean, they're always like, oh, The Sixth Sense is a great twist and so on. So I think that, whatever, even if you're writing a mystery or a thriller, be open to the idea that maybe you're not right about who the killer is or what the twist might be, and just allow the fluidity of the process to help shape the story in a way that might really satisfy your readers.
We do have one last question. I think it's a great question here from Vin before we wrap up. He says, are there any books that you would suggest for authors that are starting out in crime, a sort of Crime for Dummies 101 book as a starting point? He later clarifies that he wants to start out writing crime, but actually starting out as a criminal. I'm sure he's already started his career as a criminal. I know I have. So, but yeah, that's a great question. Any particular books that you would recommend for people who are wanting to write crime/police procedurals?
To get your forensics accurate, D.P. Lyle, Doug Lyle is a friend of mine. He's written a couple of books on forensics. I think it might be actually Forensics for Writers or Forensics for Dummies or something like that. But look up D.P. Lyle. He's a consultant for CSI and other shows on television. So that'll help you to get your forensics and so on right. And as far as writing, there's also a book out there called, I think it's called How to Write a Killer Mystery. No, that's not right. I better not. I don't think that's quite right. Off the top of my head, I can't recall.
We'll Google it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a ton of books, especially Writer's Digest has a good lineup of books on writing mysteries and writing crime. I would say, take a peek at some of those. I've written 2 books on the craft of writing. Story Trumps Structure and Troubleshooting Your Novel. You might check those out as well for whatever genre you write in.
Very, very well respected books, by the way. Just a lot of good feedback on those. As in terms of craft books, they're pretty high up there on that list. So, Stephen, thanks again for joining us. This was a lot of fun. You can always find us at aarongansky.com, altongansky.com, franklymydearmojo.com. Stephen, where can our listeners go if they want to find more of your books and hear more of your wonderful voice?
Well, they can go to stephenjames.net for information about my books. You can also check out thestoryblender.com. I interview leading authors. I've interviewed Al in the past, and so I lead leading storytellers in both film and print, and all of the podcasts there are free to listen to. So thestoryblender.com, a great resource. It's probably about 50 or 60 different interviews I've done with some of the leading authors in the world.
Wow.
Awesome. I have not been on that yet, so
No, but your dad has, so it's okay.
Yeah, he said leading authors.
That's what I was trying to figure out.
Thank
So
you for
I just
saying
wanted to
that,
know where
so I
fell
didn't
on
have
that,
to.
so that's what I was going for. That was the setup, and you got the spike. Thank you. So, well, that's all the time we have. Next week, or actually in a couple weeks, we'll be taking a look at action and adventure novels. We'd love to have you there. So, in the meantime, don't forget you can always ask the author at aarongansky.com, and that's it. So, thanks so much for listening, and until next week, good writing.